The world knew Lou Reed as rock's rebel poet, the dark genius who gave voice to the underground. But in 1959, his real battle wasn't on any stage. It was in a hospital room, and the weapons were electrodes. Most people remember the leather jackets, the heroin songs, the velvet underground breaking every rule. What they don't know is that before Lou Reed became the man who taught rock music to speak about the streets, someone tried to erase who he was, his own family. The method was electroshock therapy. The goal was to make him normal. The result would haunt every song he ever wrote. That spring night in Brooklyn, 17-year-old Louis Allen Reed sat in his parents' Buick, watching streetlights blur past the window. He thought they were taking him to see another therapist. Sydney and Toby Reed had been worried for months. Their son was intelligent, sensitive, played guitar beautifully, but something was wrong. He didn't date girls the way other boys did. He spent too much time with certain male friends. He wrote strange poetry that made them uncomfortable. In 1959 America, in a middle-class Jewish family in Freeport, Long Island, being different wasn't just concerning. It was dangerous. It was something that needed to be fixed. Before we continue with what happened that night, if you want to explore more untold stories about Lou Reed's life, the secrets behind his songs, and the darkness that created his genius, please subscribe to this channel. We bring you the stories that shaped rock history, the moments that changed everything. The Buick pulled up to Creedmoor Psychiatric Center, a sprawling institution in Queens where New York sent people who needed to be fixed. Sydney Reed had spent weeks consulting with doctors who promised that electroconvulsive therapy could cure homosexual tendencies, could rewire a troubled mind, could make his son normal. What they didn't mention was that it was essentially controlled brain damage. Electrical currents forced through a teenager's skull to scramble the circuits that made him who he was. Lou didn't understand what was happening until they led him down the long corridor, past rooms where other patients sat with vacant stares. A nurse took his arm, professional and cold, and his mother wouldn't meet his eyes. The fear came sharp and real. The room was small and white, too bright, with a table that looked more like a torture device than anything medical. Leather straps, electrodes, a machine that hummed with electricity. They strapped him down. They placed electrodes on his temples. A rubber guard went into his mouth to prevent him from biting through his tongue. The doctor's voice counted down, clinical and detached, and then the current hit. His body convulsed, arching against the restraints, muscles contracting so violently that patients sometimes broke their own bones. His mind exploded into white light, and then nothing. When he came back, he couldn't remember his name, couldn't remember where he was, only the smell of his own burned skin and the taste of blood in his mouth. But this wasn't just one treatment. This was the beginning of a nightmare that would last 8 weeks. 3 times a week, Sydney and Toby Reed drove their son to Creedmoor. 3 times a week, Lou was strapped to that table. 3 times a week, electricity tore through his brain, erasing memories, scrambling thoughts, destroying neural pathways that had taken 17 years to build. The doctors told his parents he was improving, that his deviant tendencies were being corrected. What they didn't see was what was happening behind Lou's eyes. The light was going out. Between treatments, Lou sat in the day room with other patients, teenagers who had been sent there for the same reason: being different, being gay, being too artistic, too sensitive, too much themselves. They didn't talk much. What was there to say? Their families had betrayed them. Lou watched a boy his age who used to paint now stare at blank walls, unable to remember how to hold a brush. He saw a young woman who had written poetry struggle to speak in complete sentences. Lou understood that what was being done to them wasn't medicine. It was erasure. The physical effects were brutal. Lou suffered severe headaches that felt like his skull was splitting open. He lost chunks of memory, entire days from his childhood simply gone. His hands trembled constantly, making it difficult to hold his guitar. He developed a sensitivity to bright lights that would last his entire life, which is why he would almost never be photographed without dark sunglasses. But worse than the physical damage was the mental confusion, the paranoia, the sense of disconnection from reality that would haunt him for decades. His parents visited on weekends. Toby brought cookies from home, as if sugar could balance out what they were allowing to happen to their son. Sydney asked doctors for updates, nodding as they explained the progress. Did they see the way Lou flinched when they approached? Did they notice how he wouldn't meet their eyes? If they did, they convinced themselves it was temporary, that once the treatment was complete, they would have the son they wanted, the one who fit, the one who was normal. What Sydney and Toby didn't understand was that electroshock therapy in 1959 was barely more sophisticated than when it was first developed in the 1930s. Send enough electricity through someone's brain and you can change them. The problem was you couldn't control what changed. It was sledgehammer psychiatry, crude and brutal. Lou Reed was just one of thousands of teenagers subjected to this treatment in the late 1950s, part of a medical establishment's attempt to cure what they saw as sexual deviance. By the 6th week, Lou had learned to dissociate during the treatments. As they strapped him down, he would go somewhere else in his mind, a place they couldn't reach. He thought about music, about guitar chords, about songs he wanted to write. He thought about New York beyond Long Island's suburbs, about places where maybe being different wasn't something that needed to be fixed. He thought about escape. The other patients became his first real community. There was Michael, 19, caught with another boy. Sarah, 16, whose mother found her diary filled with poems about a girl. Thomas, 20, who refused to conform to gender expectations. They shared stories in whispers. Lou listened more than he spoke, absorbing their pain, their anger, their determination to survive. These connections would later become the foundation of his art. The Velvet Underground wasn't just about music. It was about giving voice to everyone who had been told they were too different to exist as themselves. The doctors declared the treatment successful after 8 weeks and 24 sessions. They told Sydney and Toby that their son had been cured, that the homosexual tendencies had been addressed. They warned about memory loss, difficulty concentrating, personality changes, but these were acceptable side effects. Better a son who was forgetful than one who was deviant. Sydney wrote a check, shook the doctor's hand, and took Lou home. In the car, Toby tried to make conversation. Lou stared out the window and said nothing. The people who were supposed to love him unconditionally had decided that who he was wasn't acceptable, and they had paid strangers to torture him until he changed. Back home in Freeport, Lou tried to resume his life. He returned to school, but he couldn't concentrate. Words on the page swam and blurred. He would lose time, suddenly finding himself somewhere with no memory of how he got there. His hands still trembled when he picked up his guitar, but he forced himself to play. The music sounded different now, darker, angrier. He started writing lyrics about hospitals, about electricity, about betrayal. His parents heard him playing late at night and told themselves it was good that he was finding healthy outlets. They didn't listen to the words. The trembling never completely stopped. For the rest of his life, Lou Reed's hands would shake slightly, a permanent reminder of those 8 weeks. The memory loss never fully reversed. There were entire years of his childhood that simply didn't exist for him anymore. He would struggle with relationships, with trust. How do you trust anyone after the people who gave you life decided you needed to be unmade? How do you believe in love when you learn that love is conditional? But something else happened in those months after Creedmoor. The electricity hadn't erased who Lou was. It had crystallized it. Every shock had burned away any doubt, any willingness to compromise, any desire to fit in. They had tried to break him, and instead they had forged him into something harder, sharper, more determined. If being himself meant being broken in their eyes, then he would be magnificently broken. The boy who went into Creedmoor had been unsure, confused. The young man who came out knew exactly who he was. Lou threw himself into music with obsessive intensity. He practiced guitar until his fingers bled. He started playing with local bands, but he was already hearing something different, something darker. He discovered jazz and how it broke rules. He found blues, the authentic voice of pain and survival. He started writing his own songs about the street, about drugs, about sex without romance, about the parts of life that polite society pretended didn't exist. His parents were horrified. This wasn't the cure they had expected. By the time Lou left for Syracuse University in 1960, he was planning his escape from everything Freeport represented. At Syracuse, he found Delmore Schwartz, the poet who taught him that literature could be raw and devastating. He found students reading Ginsberg and Kerouac, questioning everything. He found music that pushed boundaries, that refused to be safe. Most importantly, he found that he wasn't alone, that there were others who had survived their own versions of what he had survived. The electroshock became a defining trauma, but Lou refused to let it define him as a victim. He weaponized it. He wrote about it in songs like Kill Your Sons, singing directly about parents who thought they were helping while they were destroying. He wrote about it in Waves of Fear, capturing the terror of losing your mind to electricity. When other artists sanitized their pasts, Lou Reed put his trauma on display, forcing audiences to confront how society treated people who didn't conform. In 1964, when Lou met John Cale and they began creating the Velvet Underground, the shadow of Creedmoor was in every note. The dissonance, the feedback, the deliberate assault on comfortable listening was informed by those 8 weeks of electrical assault. When Lou sang about heroin, about street life, about transgender women and hustlers, he was singing about the community of the broken. The Velvet Underground was a declaration that people who didn't fit deserved to have their stories told. Andy Warhol understood this immediately. Warhol himself was everything that 1950s America had tried to stamp out. He saw in Lou Reed someone who had been through the fire and come out refined, concentrated, into pure artistic defiance. The factory became the creative home Lou had never had, a place where being strange was currency. For someone who had spent 8 weeks being tortured for being different, the factory must have felt like vindication. But the damage never fully healed. Lou struggled with depression throughout his life, waves of darkness that would crash over him without warning. He had difficulty forming lasting relationships, always waiting for betrayal. His drug use was at least partially self-medication, a way to quiet the noise in his head. The trembling in his hands got worse when stressed, and there are recordings where you can hear it in his guitar playing. slight unsteadiness that makes the music more raw. His relationship with his parents never recovered. They attended some early performances, trying to understand this new son. They wanted to believe they had done the right thing. They couldn't accept that they had participated in torture, that they had valued conformity over their son's soul. Lou eventually stopped speaking to them for years at a time. When he did see them, conversations were strained, full of things that couldn't be said. When Lou created Metal Machine Music in 1975, that infamous album of nothing but feedback and noise, it wasn't just artistic experimentation. It was the sound of electroshock therapy, the pure electrical assault translated into audio form. Listeners who called it torture were exactly right. That was the point. Lou was making his audience experience a fraction of what he had experienced. "This is what happened to me," the album said. "This is what it sounds like inside my head." His relationships were marked by patterns established in that Buick on the way to Creedmoor. He would fall deeply in love and then sabotage the relationship, waiting for inevitable betrayal. His famous relationship with Rachel was both his most open-hearted connection and ultimately another casualty of his inability to fully trust. The electroshock hadn't just damaged his brain, it had damaged his ability to believe in permanence, in safety, in home. But Lou also became a beacon for everyone who had been through something similar. As awareness of gay conversion therapy's horrors grew, his openness gave others permission to speak their truth. He received letters from fans who had also survived electroshock, who found in his music validation that they weren't crazy, they weren't broken, they were survivors. Lou kept these letters. Speaking about what he survived had value beyond just his own healing. When Lou married Laurie Anderson in 2008, many saw it as his final transformation. Anderson was an artist who understood the cost of creation. With her, Lou seemed to soften. He took up Tai Chi, meditation, practices that helped calm the electrical storm in his nervous system that had been raging since 1959. Friends who had known him for decades were amazed, but Anderson understood. This wasn't surrender. This was Lou finally winning the battle that started in that hospital room. He had survived. He had created. He had refused to be erased. The liver disease that killed Lou Reed in 2013 was caused by hepatitis C, contracted from decades of drug use. In his final weeks, he continued practicing Tai Chi even as his body failed. Anderson was with him, holding his hand as he died. He went peacefully. But those who knew the full story understood what that meant. Lou had been preparing for death since he was 17. He had spent his entire life proving that they hadn't killed him in that hospital room. And in the end, he won. He died as himself, uncompromised, unfixed. The legacy of those 8 weeks extends far beyond Lou's personal story. The Velvet Underground influenced countless artists, teaching generations that rock music could be about dark corners, uncomfortable truths, people society wanted to ignore. Every punk band, every alternative artist, every musician who sang about being an outsider owes something to what Lou Reed survived and transformed into art. He proved that trauma doesn't have to destroy you, that what breaks you can also make you, that the things society wants to eliminate might be the most valuable parts of who you are. Today, the impulse that sent Lou Reed to Creedmoor persists. Parents still try to change children who don't match expectations. Conversion therapy continues in many places. Lou Reed's story matters because it exposes the violence hidden beneath the language of help and healing. Sydney and Toby Reed believed they were saving their son. Instead, they taught him that love comes with conditions, that acceptance requires conformity. In the end, the electroshock therapy failed completely. Lou Reed never became the straight, conventional son his parents wanted. Instead, he became one of the most influential artists of his generation, a voice for everyone who refused to be normalized. The trembling hands, the memory loss, the sensitivity to light, all the damage from those 8 weeks became part of what made him Lou Reed. Transformed through trauma, alchemized into art that changed music forever. Every time someone listens to the Velvet Underground, they're hearing the sound of someone who survived. That's the real legacy of 1959. They tried to erase Lou Reed. Instead, they made him immortal.